Caleb and Maeve's abduction of Hale doesn't go exactly the way they planned it, and Bernard comes across the one clue that lets us all know where we are in time, at least. Hey, our big mystery's been solved, at least the first stage. I think we're ready to move forward with the show now. It's Westworld, Season 4, Episode 4, Generation Loss. Welcome to our weekly discussion. Of course, there will be spoilers coming up ahead, so I want to be sure to let you all know that, and also say, hey, thanks for spending some time with us as we sort of break down where we are in our Westworld universe. Every season of Westworld is going to have its little mind-bendiness, where we are in time, what is reality, who is what is going on. And season 4, no different, at least by episode 4, though, they've sort of evened everything out. So we can kind of, I think, really get the actual adventure going. This week's I think tonight's episode is going to be a little bit different. Review-wise, yeah, it was a great episode. Very interesting. I love how the story was all told, how everything developed. Like I said, I do appreciate that they have kind of dealt with our big twist that we were expecting early on, because however much I've been enjoying the show, I have to say, excuse me, I was starting to get a little bored. Maybe it was just my state of mind when I threw this on. Sometimes where you are, of course, is going to determine how you're receiving a show. But part of me was kind of hitting that point where, like, okay, so where are we going? What is the actual kind of goal of all of this? So I appreciate that as that was going through my mind, this was the episode where they went, oh, okay, well, this is what's going on. This is where everything is. As I said, this is finally, I think, where the season gets to go forward from here. So let's spend a little time talking about timelines and where we are and see if we can do a little summation of where we are. If you're in the chat, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Feel free to throw in some questions, get some stuff up as I go through this. I do want to spend some little time answering questions and going over any of those things because, like I said, while the narrative on this was pretty straightforward, I think what it really did is just sort of plop all of the answers down in front of us so we could finally, place everything where it needs to be. So let me get over to my notes, which I'll have to be reading from. Okay, so our effective timeline. Shortly after the end of season 3, Maeve and Caleb storm an island lighthouse to destroy the last remnant of Rehoboam. During this point, they do have a nice little discussion of what would life be like after the war. When the fighting is all done, what does a life afterwards actually look like in this new, free from control Rehoboam world? They jump in, they destroy the lighthouse. As they're escaping, Caleb is critically injured, but Maeve manages to get him to medical help. So yes, critically injured, but not dead. As he recovers and meets what ends up being his future wife, Maeve realizes that in order to give Caleb a chance at a real world, she's got to leave. She's always going to be a target, certainly as long as Hale is out there and everything else. And with host humans, just as she sees things, for Caleb to have a life, he needs to actually have a life and be separated. So she leaves, boom, he ends up marrying his nurse, has a kid, and life basically kind of returns to normal. Goes into construction, lives his life. Now, in the meanwhile, Delos is rebuilding. With Hale running it and William Bott as her frontman, Delos begins purchasing land and influence as Hale starts to develop her real big master plan, controlling humans the way humans controlled hosts. Well, in reality, money can do an awful lot of that. So it does start with money. But of course, she does start to be able to replace certain people of influence with host copies that control, do her bidding, and all of that. Um, but for the masses, to keep Hale's people, to keep hosts safe, it's going to take something a little bit more. Now, 7 years after the end of season 3, as Hale begins putting together her final stages of her plan, including taking over the Hoover Dam data vault where the Sublime is being kept, Maeve, in a moment of weakness, digitally searches out from her self-imposed isolation to see how Caleb is doing in his life after war. Unfortunately, her search has discovered, I believe, a back trace of Delos to try and find her is what causes the power outage in the area. Since Maeve really is the only threat to Hale out there, she sends a team after her. When that fails, she sends a team after Caleb. And of course, that also fails when Maeve arrives to protect him. Caleb asks his military friends to protect his family as Maeve and he head to California to see a senator that Maeve saw William visit when she checked the hosts that attacked her. All right. So here, Maeve and Caleb discover Hale's plan to replace key figures with bots, as well as something more sinister, a way to actually program humans. The clues there lead them to an opera and finally to Delos's new stateside park, thanks to, again, the campaign contributions and replacing key figures, including the vice president, their new park, Mob World, which is basically being built, one of the many parks being built in and around Las Vegas. But unlike previous parks whose secret goal was to gather data on the guests, the goal of Mob World is to infect the guests via your ever-present fly with a Delos-designed parasite. And once in the system, these parasites can control a person's behavior by receiving signals via suboral sounds and then directing their actions, much like hosts following a narrative. In this discovery, of course, Caleb is infected, but he and Maeve still capture Hale and attempt to escape with her in order to stop her plan. And they fail. Maeve is killed in an explosion as she battles William Bot and buried in the desert sands, while Caleb is gunned down as Hale's team storm their shed. That's the end of their story. Well, sort of. We'll get there. In the years that follow, the Delos parasite spreads and infects what we can figure to be at least a significant population, percentage of the population, if not everyone. They seem to imply everyone, but we also have rebels out there, so let's just say at least a significant percentage. But as Caleb demonstrated shortly before his death, adults are not 100% susceptible. There is a point at which the mind is unwilling to bend. I think we've seen that, heard that used before. Children, however, much more malleable. And as you grow up, the parasite is just part of you. So while initially the battle takes time, eventually Hale's takeover is complete. It just takes a generation. And at that point, the world is hers. Now, the effective present of Westworld. 23 years after Hale's defeat of Mael and Caleb, Bernard awakens from his journey to the Sublime. It's 30 years later, and since it's 1,000 years in the Sublime for every year here, that is 30,000 years in the Sublime, using that time to chart all possible futures. In order to locate one, do we have some Doctor Strange feeling going over? Like, did 1,400,300? There's a whole lot of them. He just lived all those lives, looked at each variation in order to chart a path for humanity's survival. Of course, Stubbs, loyally hanging out with him, though allowing him to gather dust. It does explain why Bernard had so much dust on him. 7 years didn't seem like enough there. 30 years, now that seems about right. That seems about right. I think at the end of season 3, I was guessing like 100 years or something. It's not quite that long, but long enough. So, connecting back with Stubbs, he links up with a human resistance group to retrieve Maeve's body so she can be used to help take the world back from Hale. Because, of course, Maeve is the only real threat. Now, a member of that resistance group, C, is, of course, most likely Frankie, Caleb's daughter, now grown up, which is why she seems to understand the weapon and certainly recognize Maeve's face, even if she may not necessarily be able to locate it. There was that, hey, look, because, of course, she met her very briefly when she was 7. Or 6-ish, if we're going to follow that time. Anyway. Now, Hale, meanwhile, has finally made a successful host copy of Caleb. Why? Well, she seems to have developed a fascination with a human that both Dolores and Maeve believed in and connected with. She makes the comment at the end of this episode as well. You intrigue me. And he was strong enough to fight against Hale's influence to shoot William Bott in the battle between him and Maeve, which, again, very cool. Love the desert stuff. A lot of great feel in those scenes for the giant machines. And was it in season 1 that were digging through and destroying and making new lands for extending the park? This kind of the same similar feel, I think. Now, the other thing is, Hale's also keeping William in cryostasis, the real William, alive. She would have kept, I think, Caleb alive if he had lived and wasn't shot to death during her rescue. But I think that this is the drive to create a Caleb, which is, of course, you're creating an enemy under your own control, effectively. Why? I think is going to be an interesting kind of pursuit and discussion. While a couple of ideas on that is, one, of course, she just has an insistent need to lord over those that she has defeated. You were once an enemy, you created a problem, and now I must rub your nose in it for all of eternity. It makes me feel good. Could be. It was a little messed up. The other idea is that she's lonely. And this is the only way to actually connect with someone outside of herself. It has to be under her control. William locked up in cryostasis, now Caleb as a host that can be effectively controlled that way. But still, this need to have these people around that are enemies, that are different, that are conflicting. Now, during the fight with Maeve, William Bott, I know I got to stop. Should I just call him Man in Black, and then William? It seems better. Man in Black mentioned to Maeve about killing all your friends. I've killed all your friends. Now, we know that he effectively took over Clementine, and we saw that that's right after Hale sort of revealed herself. Then they found Clementine and try and pulled her in. Inquiring mind, maybe it's because Caleb is an outlier. Yeah. And that could be exactly one of those things, her need to sort of defend that, to understand that. I mean, that's it. Even if he is an outlier, why does that fascinate her? But as I was mentioning, Man in Black had mentioned to Maeve about killing all of your friends. So we're not sure actually how many independent hosts are actually out there. I mean, so many escaped out through the Sublime. We know that Hector was killed. We know that Clementine was taken over. We don't know how many actual, we'll just say, independent hosts, those that were not under the control created by Hale in any matter, actually exist. Hale may actually be alone. Everyone else out there may be a copy of her, a Dolores copy of some folks, or a replacement copy. I mean, Man in Black seems to be a host version of William that, again, more directed and hated towards that. So, and we had the senator being replaced, the vice president being, but I don't know if they are fully realized hosts like Caleb is. Again, Caleb is kind of that special pursuit they were doing to, can you actually put almost like a human consciousness in a host body. I'm not sure what the variations on those copies are, but it does kind of make it sort of an interesting idea, is that Hale, despite the fact that she has now created a world that she controls that is safe for her children, how many people are out there? It could be a lot, which is kind of what we get to when we get to Christine. Because all of Christine's stuff, I mean, we could say basically that for the most part, all of Christine's stuff has been now current. All of the Bernard stuff has been now current. All of the Maeve and Caleb stuff that we saw have all been basically flashbacks. Or you could say part of the program that the current Caleb bot went through in order to, self-actualize and go through all of those things. Inquiring mind, both William and Caleb were outliers last season. Rehoboam couldn't predict their behavior. Yeah, exactly. Though again, less predictive now, more controlling with the parasite. Yeah, but yeah, there may be something with them that is of interest to Hale, which could be, again, explaining that. I'm just sort of curious why her obsession. Why would you create a Caleb bot? Why would you keep William around? What is her real kind of motivation with that? Is it ego? Is it loneliness? Is it some internal part of her that wants to be defeated? A tiny speck of Dolores still kind of screaming out from inside? Obviously, these are things that we're going to be diving into for the rest of the season. Okay, so Christine. All right, so she's a host, thinking that she's human, working at an entertainment company that is effectively the new Delos. This was the same company as we saw that Caleb ran out the doors of. That's the same one that Christine works in. Now, the human citizens are mentally controlled to not see the giant tower that controls them or the sound device around. Think They Live, if anybody was a fan of the old John Carpenter film with Roddy Piper. Thank you, I can get that out in Keith David, with one of the most over-the-top, ridiculous alley fights ever put to screen. Anyway, love that movie. But the same type of way where they are programmed, they're basically told you don't see this, which is why we never see in the background where Christine is moving through the city or the citizens working through the city. We don't see the giant tower that we just see at the end of this episode. Why? Because they're not supposed to see it. So there. It's just sort of an interesting way of doing it. Who could see it? Well, the birds, like I said, could hear the suboral sounds, and that could potentially damage them if they're too powerful to stroke. Or if you do have a little mental problem, maybe that little parasite thing doesn't completely set itself up, a little crazy person living out on the streets, maybe you can still see the tower. I'm the only one that can see it, me and the birds. Which would make sense. Of course, the interesting part was, of course, Rehoboam was destroyed to create a world where humanity could no longer be steered, and instead it has resulted in a world where they are more literally controlled. It's more absolute. Their lives are scripted. It's and in fact, the city that we're in might even be, I don't know, like the inverse of Delos, a park, a reverse park, where hosts in the outside world come to the city to see what humanity living is like. Remember, we had that line in the first one where those visitors come in. Oh my God, you've never been here. It's the first time. Let me take you down into here. Or it's the first time they've been to a city, or are they visitors to a park? And we're seeing this park from the human hosts that live it out. Um, yeah, and the humans are being scripted by narratives that are being written by Christine and other people in the company, which is some of them eventually see it, like we had our little visitor, but some of these are just repeated storylines, which is gives an interesting one when we see Teddy show up. Because one, God, really love seeing Teddy. Really couldn't wait for him to show up and was really excited. Inquiring mind, yeah, this is exactly where we're going into with this reversed run that you were talking about, yes, last week. Yeah, indeed. So with Teddy, Teddy seems to be aware of who he is. He even sort of makes a line about a wrestler with a heart of gold, or a troublemaker with a heart of gold, something Western. I missed it when I was writing down my notes. Um, and the way that he, of course, connects with Dolores certainly seems to imply that he is aware of who he is. Which brings kind of an interesting question up: is he here to try and wake up Dolores to who she is? Or, I mean, if you wanted to get dark and evil, is he just a repeat visitor like William, coming to see Dolores, a version of Dolores who is repeated or fixed every time? I mean, again, that's a little bit darker, but I mean, the whole setup when she drops her thing and it rolls out and he picks it up. I mean, just trying to be chivalrous. It is such Westworld, and we've seen these repeated themes. Like I said, our dead guy. This could just be an old storyline where this person is just repeating it over and over and over again. This is his repeating narrative, and they just replace him with new humans. They could look like anything or anyone. It kind of even adds a little variability. So you're not always seeing the same person. Bounty hunter with a heart of gold. Thank you, inquiring mind. Yeah, so like I said, I think this is the interesting place where the story really gets to kind of start. Because all up to now, we've basically just been doing catch up to where we are. And the fact that instead of going to rescue, to save the world from being taken over, you have to rescue it once it already has been taken over. It's a very kind of, again, cool reversal. We're not here to save the world. The war's already lost. It was lost a generation ago. Now we have to see if we can save it, if we can bring it back. Which again would also be an interesting way where you see that, but they said whatever the path was, whatever the journey was, humanity always died at the end. And maybe this is the one of the ways too, is they're just like cattle, just overused, and just they run out, they go extinct. We used up all the humans. Humans used up all the carrier pigeons. Then we used up all the humans. What do we do now? Or of course it comes up into a giant war and battle and so on. So, but now we get to, again, have an interesting thing. We have Teddy dealing with Christine and whatever is going on with that. We have Caleb, but now awake. We have Maeve rescued from the desert sands by Bernard, who definitely has a plan and knows all the variations. And we get the family reunion because C is, like I said, most likely Frankie, Caleb's daughter, who will now get a chance to find out what happened with her dad, which is all very cool. So, that again, that kind of, I don't know, like I said, by dealing with the whole storyline, it pretty much covers the whole episode. Like I said, from how everything does, from critical standpoint, it carried everything through. I think it was a great reveal. I think it was about halfway through the episode where everything sort of kind of clicked in, and I was like, oh, this is where and that's always fun. And then you see it all start to play out. It was definitely very cool. And by that point, all of the Easter eggs and little hints and stuff definitely started dropping together. So I'm sure through most of us, wasn't necessarily all the way at the end when we realized what was going on. It was a few steps earlier where things started to come into place and realize, you know, this is cool. The interesting thing is that obviously after Mob World kind of did its thing, Delos didn't bother doing any more parks in that area. Because again, this is just outside of that park. We know that they were purchasing all the land around Las Vegas. It looked like the same machines that they were being used to build parks. And yet now, 23 years later, it's still just all open desert. So I don't think that infection took that long. I think Hale's basic victory occurred pretty quick. And yeah, inquiring, I totally believe that Frankie's going to meet her host dad, and we're going to have whole reunions and things, and probably sacrifices and stuff like that, and all those big heroic story arcs and things of those manner. But again, how do you save the entire world? Not stop the world from being lost, bring it back from the brink. A much more interesting pursuit. But of course, we got Maeve, who always kicks ass. And as I said, I agree. Teddy's a little suspect, but God, I loved seeing him. And I really, I want to put all of my optimism in there that he's there to do something really cool. Because I like, I'm a bit of a romantic, okay? I like Dolores and Teddy together. I think that that's kind of a nice way. I want Maeve to be reunited with her kid. I want Teddy and Dolores to have a nice kind of future together. Want Caleb to be able to see his daughter. But yeah, not everyone's definitely going to make it out of here. But it does, again, create some really interesting stakes. The other bigger question is, of course, how much of the world has Hale taken over? Is it everyone? Is everyone affected? And thus, do our resistance fighters basically just have to stay outside of these, sound towers and thus not fall under control? Or are they naturally resistant? Perhaps that's one of the things inside Caleb as well, is it's not just a maturity thing that some adults are not susceptible. There may be something, and this may be something inquiring mind that you're looking into with Hale's pursuit of the outliers. Thank you very much. That there may be something in there with them that is resistant of that control, and she's trying to use that copy in order to pursue. I would think it might be a biological thing it's passed around from father to daughter, but that could be one of those. Or is it just that not everyone got infected? Some people escaped out, and as long as they can avoid certain things, or perhaps they might have even found a counter to the infection, but no way of actually implementing it. And that could be one of the things they use as well. So again, a lot of sort of potentialities of where they're going, but we're almost halfway through the season here. Or about halfway through the season. So it's definitely got to be all action, all story, a lot of stuff coming up. So I think that's kind of everything. I don't really know what else to cover. This was a quick one today. But next week, I think we're going to have some guests. I think it's about time. We've covered enough basic storyline stuff. We have had enough things to happen where we can actually have an interesting kind of conversation. So I think Mark from Enchantment Attorney is going to join me up next week, and we might get Alyssa in as well from Alyssa Jean's review. So I'm going to see what we can all sort of manage with that. But want to know any other questions in the chat? Anything else before we sign things off? All right. Well, in the meantime, thank you all so much for joining us. Please be sure to hit that like, subscribe, notifications button. We're doing this every Thursday night, 7 p.m. or every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. while Westworld comes in. And then we'll be jumping back to Thursdays when She-Hulk premieres in mid-August. Also, did see some of the trailers for our next Star Wars visit, which actually is looking really good. I was kind of excited about that. My fear is Andor's going to have like a 10-year-old in the middle of it, and we're going to have that kind of storyline. But, through at least the most recent previews that I've seen, visually, this looks the best so far. We have much more complex action scenes, things going on. I'm tentatively excited about that. So we might be doing some discussions in and around She-Hulk with that as well. But that will be Thursdays at 6 o'clock in our regular time as soon as Westworld is done, which we're doing every Tuesday at 7. Tuesdays at 7 for Westworld, Thursdays at 6 for everything else. We're going to keep that up. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. Thanks, you Inquiring Mind, for all your questions. We will catch you all next week. Have a good evening and take care. Bye-bye. Dun, dun.